me introduce you to the panel. Liz O'Neill, many of you will be familiar with. Liz brings a really strong corporate background. She's just moved into a role as CFO at Candour Aura. Prior to that, she's held a number of CFO roles across numerous different industries. Worked across consumer goods, electricity, media, now government. You were Chief Financial Officer at Coca-Cola for about 5 years or so.
Yep.
And you also spent spells as CFO and COO at TVNZ pretty recently.
Yep.
Great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Blair is also pretty new into a new role as Chief Commercial Officer for Wet and Forget. Many of you might be aware that Wet and Forget were purchased by Direct Capital or invested by Direct Capital last year as part of executive team change. Blair's joined as Chief Commercial Officer. Prior to that, a really strong track record, particularly in the FMCG space. Blair came up through sales career, long tenure with Coca-Cola before moving into a role as GM Sales at Sanford. Great to have you here, Blair. Thanks for making the time. Thérèse Singleton, you will know Thérèse is a lawyer. She brings vast experience, particularly in life insurance realm. She was at AMP for quite a number of years. She had numerous, well, maybe 2 GM roles there, 3 GM roles there, before moving into a role as CE of Resolution Life after they bought AMP's life insurance business back in 2020. And then in the last couple of years, Thérèse switched codes, so to speak. She's now in general insurance with Ando. She initially joined them as COO, and then she's moved, what, a couple of weeks, 3 weeks ago? Yep. Into the Chief Exec position. So really good to have you with us.
Thanks, Ed.
And finally, Mark Ryland. Yeah, many of you will be familiar with Mark. Mark's currently on the board at AA Insurance. But prior to that, he's got a long background in financial services, particularly in the funds management arena. He was COO of Macquarie, New Zealand. He then moved in to take the helm at Brook Asset Management, and then moved into a role at Milford, and then spent about 5.5, nearly 6 years, Mark, as CE there.
Yeah, just over 6. Yep.
So fantastic. Great to have you all with us. Just to kick things off, we just wanted to kind of plug in a little bit to some of your reflections on things. When you think about moments or sort of key decisions, turning points, maybe in your careers, just interested in kind of watershed moments. What kind of occurs to you when you think back, Mark, through
a very long time. Very long time.
Any kind of key turning points when you think about prior to being in an exec role?
Yeah.
What was the kind of the watershed moment that kind of moved you more towards an exec role?
Well, if I take you way back, and this is to 1983, and some of you may not be born at that stage. I took a big risk, and I didn't actually go to university. I was an incredibly impatient, still am, person to kind of get on with things. And I had this opportunity to go and work for a big bank as a management trainee, and it looked like a, potentially a great move where you could really kind of accelerate through the ranks really quickly and actually end up in a more senior position than if I went off to university and kind of came in through that route. Basically, that wasn't a smart move. And I guess what was happening at the time is that a lot of computerization was really starting to hit banks and those kind of regulators. So that the opportunities to progress fast through the ranks was proving extremely difficult. So as a kind of a young kind of 19 and a half, still pretty green, I took the decision that this wasn't kind of right for me, and I needed to kind of get out. And still wasn't sure what to do, but the area I was kind of living in, it was a hotbed for insurance, and I kind of moved it into insurance just to effectively get out of banking. And while I was there was an opportunity to move into the accounting side, and I started to kind of train as an accountant or study. But I soon realised that where I was just wasn't giving me the right kind of experience, so I moved again. So this is kind of 3 moves inside 3 years, which you wouldn't recommend to anyone, or wouldn't recommend to any of you. So kind of pretty brave, but I moved into another company which actually wasn't financial services. But that gave me the opportunity to have some really great hands-on accounting experience across a whole number of roles while I studied to be an accountant. So if I kind of look back, that was a kind of a a pretty kind of brave set of moves, really. You could play brave stupid, not going to university, but to kind of react to what I was finding and to move around a bit and find myself in the right place. It's great. Probably another one would be my first opportunity to be a managing director or CEO, and that was while I was part of AXB. They had a wholly owned subsidiary, a company called Aegis, which doesn't really exist today, but it was the largest investment wrap platform in New Zealand at the time. So it was a kind of a nice opportunity where you had the coverage of a bigger group, but it had to be independent because some of its customers were actually competitors of the bank, the likes of Westpac and Macquarie, etc. So you could kind of very self-contained run it on its own. That was kind of one of those moments where you kind of go, that was the first time I was moving away from a role that didn't have kind of accounting as part of the remit. So I'd had lots and lots of various roles where accounting was still part of the remit. You're adding on client services, you're adding on operations, you're adding on various different bits of reporting. But that was the first one where you go, can I make it into a CEO role? And I guess the thinking at the time was saying, you're kind of moving, I guess, when you move into a CEO type role, is can I think around the more what possibilities? So you've proved yourself around being able to execute well, be able to run the numbers well, be able to organise teams, etc., etc. But can you make that slightly shift above the line around that much more what possibilities, innovation, thing to inspire people? So you have that kind of moment of kind of, can I really do this? And what I would say to all of you is I had an excellent coach at the time that really shaped up how you went around how you go about that role, which is quite different to roles I've been in terms of really working out your stakeholders, knowing your strengths, knowing how to build the right team around you was critical. And what I would say is that what tends to happen is being an accountant, you might go into a role like that, big new role, and you go, look, I'm good at accounting. Well, that's what I keep telling myself, no one else is telling me, but I'm good at that. So I don't need a good accountant. I don't need a top CFO because I'll cover that. Now, of course, what happens is you spend all your time drifting back into what's your strong suit, and you're not moving into all the areas you really need to move into. So you actually have to do the opposite. A situation like that, recruit an outstanding CEO. It's going to tell you where to go and stay out of it. And it allows you to really concentrate on all those new disciplines around kind of distribution, sales, marketing, brand, etc., that you need to kind of spend time. So I would say, certainly if I look back, that was the kind of thinking at that stage. But it's quite a brave call. As soon as you move away from your core discipline, it's not that easy to go back. So if you moved into a CEO role and you fail, then people are looking at you and go, well, I didn't really want to do accounting. The bit of a CEO, well, where are you going? Yeah. Again, I'd say you just go back yourself and kind of give away.
Thanks. Thérèse.
I think there's probably quite a lot of examples that I would call, but the ones that are the most interesting, and some of you would have heard this before, is that, and they probably center around being bold and backing yourself and impatience, so those kind of themes. And when I was leaving Ireland, because I was qualified as a solicitor and barrister in Ireland and England, and had a really good job, and my going away card from the Irish team was career suicide. Who moves to New Zealand for a career? And I had specialised in pensions and investments, and I arrived in New Zealand, and guess what? There was no pensions and there was no investment market, so to speak. So I thought, what in the name of God am I going to do? So the CEO of the company I'd come from was still a kind of a mentor to me, and he was like, I cannot believe in the entire country of New Zealand you cannot get a job. And I'm saying, it's true, I can't get a job. So I ended up working voluntarily for a couple of barristers. And then from there, every door just opened because I started to meet people. And then the job at A&P came up in Wellington. I'd never been to Wellington. And I just backed myself and I said to my husband, well, it's either Dublin or Wellington because I can't stay here. I'm just so frustrated in what I'm doing. So making the move, it actually was a loss leader for us. It cost me more money to commute to Wellington. But I just knew that the job was the best opportunity for me, and I backed myself. And absolutely, it was by far the best leap for me. Certainly since I came to New Zealand. And then the second part, slightly different, was kind of that move from general management to executive management. And the thing that I've always held with me is, and this is a common theme, is around curiosity and understanding the environment that you're in. And we had a new CE that had come in from Australia, and he was entirely different to the previous CE, and he was a ball breaker. And he was absolutely really rigid and directive. Simon will know what I'm talking about, so is Kristen. But he was really, really smart. And so all the execs were rattling their boots around how are we going to keep this guy happy, blah, 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 blah. So through the process of being observing him and trying to figure out exactly what he wanted to do with the business, actually creating a relationship directly with him was really important. So having the balls to go directly into him, having balls to go in and say, what can I do for you in my role? It doesn't mean that I was shafting my direct line manager, but I understood what he wanted to achieve. And I spent the time to try and get inside his head. And then exec roles, when they came up, that was a pretty easy jump then for me. And that was the first big leap into senior roles. So again, around backing yourself, being bold, you don't have to be arrogant about it, but just that sense of frustration and impatience, I think, is quite a common theme in terms of needing to actually push yourself out there. Nobody's going to do it for you. You've got to do it for yourself.
Did the role that you have just give you that access?
Yes,
Yeah,
so I was
okay.
a general counsel,
Okay.
but I was sitting underneath another role. And so, yes, I had that beauty of having that level of technical expertise that others didn't have, and you had to listen.
Yeah. Blair, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, look, it's probably slightly different tangent, but I guess a little bit like Mark, I didn't go through the university route, and I, unlike him, had very little ambition when I started the career. So I'd been drifting through jobs and run my own business and done various things for sort of 6 or 7 years post school. And my now lovely wife said to me one day, as I was making like very good money for the time in a sales role, making some more money out of the footy side of things, and my now wife said to me, what the hell are you going to do with your life? I thought I was doing pretty well. Which then led me to sort of 2 months later, I'd gone into the FMCG sort of side of things and was working 3 times harder for half the pay. But that 5 years later had taken me through 6 roles within Coca-Cola, and I see a couple of my old colleagues at the back, and then into executive sort of roles from there on. And I guess it probably message from the learning from me out of that is, A, I needed a good kick in the ass, but B, sometimes the path forward is not always linear, you know, so that's taken really significant, and it was a age and stage of life where that wasn't really a problem. So took a big step backwards to sort of move forwards, which turned out to be, you know, very luckily a good decision. And the other part is probably when I was sort of leaving that organization 5 years later was, you know, this is an interesting pathway to executive, but yeah, New Zealand is a really, really small market, and yeah, how we sort of leave roles is just as important as how we work in them. And I think the big learning is I was leaving that organization, and my boss's boss at the time, yeah, came in one day and said, "You're actually do a lot of hours for someone who's already resigned." Well, that person has been my boss twice since then, and yeah, that to me is just you just show up with integrity, whether you're there for the long term or short term, and it'll see you well in a market this size. So that's key learning for me.
Yeah, that underlying work ethic.
When I reflected on this question, I guess my pivotal point came while I was at Telecom, and yes, it's always going to be Telecom to me, because for the 11 years while I was there, it was Telecom. And I had been there about 8 years, and I'd had a boss at the time, and you don't often get a boss who does this, who's actually having a development conversation with you and challenging you to think about the things that you could be doing. And he had suggested that his role, which was the CFO for one of the business units at Telecom, was something I should aspire to in the medium to long term. And I thought, okay, that gives me something to work on. And then about 6 weeks later, he came to me and said, I'd been moved on. He'd been moved on to do a project that was the Chorus, what became Chorus. And I want you to stand in my role for 5 to 6 months, subject to the project going ahead. And I went, well, I'm not ready, because you told me it was a medium term. And so I didn't back myself. But he pushed me, as was good. But what I realized, I had actually been treading water in the role that I'd been doing as head of finance at the time, because when I got in, all of a sudden, all of these opportunities to engage in conversations really differently to what I'd had at an executive table that was relatively new in its own formation. But my eyes were open to actually maybe this role that I had been doing, I need to move on and do something different from here. So I sat in that role for 6 months, went back into the, and thoroughly enjoyed it, went back into my head of finance role, and the first opportunity that I got to exit myself out of the organisation not long after through restructuring again, I took it because I needed to do something differently and I couldn't see a pathway within the organisation. So it was backing myself eventually, but it took a little bit of time and confidence that actually I was going to enjoy that step change from a head of finance to the CFO role.
Yeah, great opportunity to try it before you.
Yeah.
So when you land in your first exec role, what are the differences that you notice immediately in terms of, obviously the responsibilities is different, but in terms of the expectations and the way that you have to orientate yourself within that new environment in comparison with what you've known as, previous sort of head of function roles?
Yeah, it's very much that functional change from being, relatively narrow, even if you've sort of worked yourself up, to suddenly being really broad. So I needed to be, as the CFO at the table, I needed to be across a good chunk of what was going on at a high level, and that would have been very different because I'd, led teams and supported parts of the business, but not the whole thing. So it's that real breadth really quickly. The speed of decision making and the expectations of being able to partner with the CEO of that division for a while, make those decisions really quickly because he was working at pace to try and drive the outcomes that he wanted, and it was very different to decision making support for the layer below that. So that's probably the two things that really felt different.
Were they natural strong suits for you, or is there something you come into this role and the expectations as you've outlined, do you have to then take steps to just be able to assimilate and move into that space, or was it just kind of a natural strong suit for you?
Getting across more wasn't as much of an issue because I'm naturally curious. So I was naturally interested in all of the other parts of business I hadn't been across. The decision making was as an ongoing learning. I'm a finance professional. I'm relatively risk adverse. So, I've been trained through the accounting function. So it's been a challenge to keep challenging myself to be a lot more agile in my decision making and trust my gut a lot more rather than just the numbers.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. And Blair, what about you? When you step into your first exec role, what are the things you notice immediately and sort of the difference between the two roles?
Yeah, the first thing is getting past the doubt. I guess the popular word these days is the imposter syndrome, but yeah, but it's pretty real. I think you sit there and you under contribute, over contribute, get past all of that. And then for me, it's the sort of that sort of first team principle. And I think many of you have probably already read that book, but it's real, and building those relationships to be able to operate at that sort of, overarching level rather than just focusing in on what you've been doing in the past. And also, allowing the person that you're putting into your role that you were in before to do their job, and then not try and do their job for them to Mark's point before. That's the sort of big piece for me, and really investing in those relationships to get an understanding of that wider business. So you're not just sort of lasered in on what you were before. And then just the size of the decision making. Yes, the speed, but my previous role at Farmlands, I was chief customer there for a few years, and you're making 20-year bets. So whilst there's a lot of speed, also at times there's a lot of rigor that you can't just have a fail fast, fix fast mentality. Like there's some stuff that if you do get it wrong, it's going to have a meaningful impact on the organisation. So that comes with a level of, I guess, stress, anxiety, whatever you want to call it. But just getting the right information and having the right team around you to make those decisions well, and working as a highly functioning exec. But we went from a very low level to a reasonably high level over a period of 3 years at Farmlands, and that was the change in the business, was getting that group working as a first team really, really well.
How did you adjust into those expectations? Was it just a function of time in the role? You just kind of over time you become more familiar with it, or was there any active steps you took?
Yeah, I think time and mistakes are a great teacher. Don't get it all right. And as Mark said earlier, I was lucky enough in one of my first exec roles to have a coach for 12 months, and bouncing off some of those challenges, particularly around, how do I contribute? How do I step up? What do I do in this scenario? Having a coach and having an organisation that's prepared to support you through that was a huge help, and something I'd really encourage you to ask your organisations to help you with. They won't build an development plan for you. To Liz's point, and you need to own that yourself. And having a coach you can go to is awesome.
Fantastic. Right.
Similar themes, I think. Biggest change really is the systems thinking. that when you make a decision, it has to be in the context of the organization. So that's easier said than actually done, particularly if you're new to an exec, because you might not actually understand the other parts of the business, but you have to make decisions with that in mind. And so the connections across your team are critically important. And then the second thing for me that I've always found massively useful is the outside in. So you're it in terms of your function within the business sitting at that exec table, and having as much external information. Knowledge is power is really, really important, because the board are looking to you for you to have a context within which you've made decisions. And having that environmental context, I have found, has been extraordinarily confidence building and useful. So a lot of time being spent on re-educating yourself, the way you think, and the market that you're actually in, was really helpful through that process.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, there's some key sort of go-tos or strategies that you use for that, because the information age, we just bombarded with it. Right,
Yeah,
so
there's
how
a
do you
few,
separate it to different enough?
there's only a few groups in New Zealand that are probably really worthwhile in terms of having a core education focus around the environment you're in. So there's a couple of them. One, for example, the Hugo Group. I don't know if any of you guys have been a member of that. It's just politicians come in once a month to senior leaders in the country.
Okay.
And effectively you get to hear from the top what's on the policy table, what are the big issues nationally and internationally for the country. And then you can kind of synthesize that, and you get to hear from all the leaders across the different sectors in New Zealand, and you get a really good grounding once a month of what's actually happening in New Zealand Inc. I have found that really, really helpful.
Interesting. Okay. Mark.
Unsurprisingly, I do agree with all their comments, and trying to think of something new to add is, again, I'd go back to probably where you spend your time when you make that jump up to the role. You're the top person in that role. You've got to be very clear where you want to spend your time, and you need thinking time. Because if somebody said to me a long time ago, you wouldn't drive down the third lane of a motorway looking in the rearview mirror. And we're all, to be where we are today, at exec level, or you're right on the verge of exec level, we're probably all great doers. It's kind of what gets you into that kind of position. So the big shift at times is to give yourself that time and space to really look out and think, because there's no one else doing it. If you're not doing it, you're going to be exposed. And so for me, that was that biggest, the coach I had, and this is going back to 2006, was literally saying, why don't you spend half the morning at home? This is back in the days of working being fancy and stuff. And literally just read. So you're not answering emails, you're not getting caught in the usual day to day, you're thinking, oh, I'm busy, aren't I? Great. It's literally just reading publications, seeing what's going on, thinking where you want to be. I just think for me, that's the biggest shift. You're suddenly a leader with that future direction, and you've got to snap out of the fact that, aren't I great because I'm busy? And I said to my team when I was exec in Milford, I know you're busy. Don't write me reports that show you're busy. Right? I take that for granted. Oh, you'll be there. Where are we going? Again, if I look to my exec team at Milford, it's not that you are the chief marketing officer. See yourself as an executive at Milford in that general sense. So people view you, and therefore that all-round cross-business knowledge is what you really need to be really effective when you're in that exec role. So to me, that was that biggest shift. And don't feel guilty. If you're having a wander around your property, having a wander down the road, think about, naturally, it's terrible, wasting my time. But you've got to go, well, no one else is doing it. You've got to, so that would be the big shift.
Yeah, how do you adjust to that? Because you've had a career that's not permitted you to do that almost, and so that adjustment mentally must be pretty significant.
It's really, really challenging because you just feel terrible. And this is where sometimes like a coach can come in, or you can watch behaviors of people you've worked for before, and you can see that they're going to give you that confidence that that's what they're doing. I mean, you find yourself at a board table when you're head of a team and you're not prepped about what's happening. You're exposed. You're getting literally ripped to pieces. So you soon think, right, I need to spend that time. Where's it all going? So if I'm at Milford, it's about where's the industry, the retirement savings, where's it kind of going? You're just not in this busy kind of environment. But it's hard. I think you need something. You need to write some things down, 3 or 4 things that are critical to you as a leader, and just keep checking in, because it's, you know, if you're a good leader, you're not a shit one tomorrow. Excuse my language, you won't be. But you might be over 12 to 2 years because you'll just creep away from what you think's good habits to poor habits, and you don't notice them. So write down what are your good habits, and I think especially as a leader, and we might get to this bit, you know, a little bit later, is that there's so much written on leadership. You know, you read the next article on leadership and you go, oh my God, not that, I'm not number 3, not 5, not 7, not 10. Jesus Christ, how did I even get the role? But, you know, couldn't you just short this and say, be perfect, you know, and you're there. So there is, you know, there is a lot of good things in it, but I think just zoom in on maybe 1 or 2 things, 3 things that you really stand for. So it's not saying you ignore the rest, but just grab those and just push them hard. And for me, you know, this jumping around was kind of engagement and getting stuff done. So just constantly going, right, we having good communications in the team, but we're making decisions. You know, you don't want to be in a place where the last time you did it in 1973, you know, so you just want this great comms, but we're making decisions and actually constantly asking your team, is that what it feels like? You know, you don't want to feel like you're in the army where you're just getting told what to do and there's no decent conversations, but you don't want to feel like I'm having lots of conversations and there's no action. You're just going, for me, I've just got those 2 things, whether I've done it well or not, and they've just been the bedrock of how I've, you know, tried to be a leader.
Trace, any adjustments that you had to make? You know, you come into that new role, or whether it's your current role, you've got a new set of challenges there. How do you adjust to that in terms of your mindset, maybe? Or
Well, some of them are here now, so I've got to be careful. It's completely different. Like, just for the first year, I was like, what in the name of God have I done? So I come from a very heavily regulated, very structured environment, listed entity, being sold to private equity based in the UK. Spent most of my time with the Reserve Bank or the FMA into a business that is not regulated in New Zealand, works for regulated entities, but is not regulated, to some entrepreneurs, startups, 2 of whom are sitting in the room, but with a totally different mindset. So for the first 12 months for me, it was like, well, what is the value I'm bringing here? Because I'm an expert in running a regulated entity. Guess what, we're not regulated. I'm an expert in insurance and investments. Guess what, this is a different type of insurance altogether. So it was a real reflective time for me in terms of what are you as a leader and what are you actually trying to do here. So you do end up reflecting on how important you as a leader is over and above everything else, and what it is you bring to the table as a human being as opposed to an expert. And so that's the journey, and humility, because these guys are much better at the business than I am. I'm just helping to orchestrate the outcome that we're trying to get. So it really is, I would say, the squiggly line that you mentioned is so critically important, because I went in and thought I knew everything, and if I'd been allowed to do what I wanted to do with the business, it would have been a disaster. So to sit back and allow people be the best that they are and reflect on that, to be humble and understand that you've still got loads to learn in your career and in your life. A huge lesson for me.
and is that a case then if you just sit with the anxiety, for want of a better phrase, right, for the period that it lasts?
I think I whinge and moan about it.
Some of us sit with it.
Building really strong relationships within and outside of the business, understanding the market we're in, and then ultimately accepting you're not right. You're not. You've got to sit back and reflect. These guys are better at what they do. They may not be as good as some of the stuff that you bring with you from somewhere else, but that's why they brought you on board. So you do have to go through that journey.
Brilliant. Blair, what were your reflections on that?
Yeah, fundamentally agree. So yeah, I mean, I've made the mistakes. I guess similar path. I've gone, you know, the last 3 roles: listed, cooperative, $3 billion cooperative, and now private equity, you know, small fry. And going in and learning that what the rhythm and what works for the business. Bring in sort of 70% of what you know from, you know, what's worked well for you before, but be prepared to forget some of it as well. And because yes, the people that are there, they probably have done things the same way for a long time, but some of it will be really good. I made the mistake the first time around of sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and then going, holy shit, we now have nobody who knows anything about this business. So don't do that. Maybe do a little bit of it, but not a little bit at once. Yeah, so you got to go and learn enough to be dangerous before you start making big bets. And you don't have to be the expert. And you know, those 3 roles have been from seafood, wine to seafood to agriculture, and now are into, cleaning products. And just know enough to be dangerous. Don't have to be the expert, but you've got to listen to the people who know what's going on. Bring in the skills that you've got, but don't assume everything remains equal.
Yeah, just on that note there, when you move across into different industries, are there particular steps that you take to sort of assimilate?
Yeah, don't fire everyone.
Don't fire.
Good for you.
We actively encourage.
Yeah, so it's just about, I'm inquisitive, so I like to learn the new industry anyway, but I'm also incredibly impatient. So just curving that to take enough time to know enough to make the right decisions. And I'll never be an expert. I move around too fast to be an expert in anything, but know enough to be dangerous and make good decisions.
Interesting. Liz,
so I'm right in the middle of that at the moment. So 5 weeks in, I think, when this ad came out, I wasn't the CFO for Kāinga Ora. I was at TVNZ. I've deliberately chosen different industries every time I've moved. And that is because I want to be stretched every time, but it does. I'm reappreciating the challenge of going into a very different industry and environment right now. And that balancing that desire to make a difference with the I just need to sit and try and be patient, but I'm also asked to make decisions really quickly because you're already in the role. So trying to find that really fine line of, contributing where you need to contribute, but not too deep that you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because actually there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of understanding I need to get of the context in which I'm operating in before I can actually be, really valuable.
Talk more then about decision making, because that's something that's come up quite a lot. You step into this role, all of a sudden the kind of the speed that you expected to make decisions is much higher. So just within that, what else is there from a decision making perspective that you have to adjust to?
I think, I think you use the language, Blair, that 70% you're bringing in knowledge from, decision making in other industries. And there is a level of similarities as you go through different industries, but you have to trust at a really extreme level the people who you don't actually have a relationship with really early on, and that can be really challenging because they have been in the role and know that you just, I guess you're taking a bigger leap of faith than you would, and that leap of faith gets a little bit less as you know the industry or as you know the people who you're engaging with that for the decision making. But big leap of faith.
So when you're stepping into a new organisation, plus the new industry and a new team, there's a whole lot of faith that you put in.
There's a whole lot of faith because that day one you're still required to be, to be signing off the stuff that the CFO is responsible for. Nobody's holding your hand for the 3 months until you've got your head around it. So.
And again, is that just a process over time of accepting that and feeling comfortable with it, or is there?
It's drinking from a fire hydrant for
for
currently 5 weeks. I think it's going to carry on. It's knowing where to target the bits that you go, what is the most important thing I need to deal with right now, and therefore I can dive in a little bit deep and get have a little bit more faith that my gut feel is right. But I can't get into everything. So it's just time.
Blair, what about you from a decision making point of view? Maybe this, as we talked about, a big difference there. But within that, how do you adjust to it?
I think I probably covered a bit of my journey before, but it's an uncomfortable level of trust for someone who's not a very trusting person. And so building that up. But for those of you that are in too, like when I've walked into 6 weeks ago, walked into this organisation on day 2, people go, right, here's the list of decisions we've been waiting for you to make.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? If you don't know the answers, we're in big trouble because I haven't got a frigging clue. So that's not a helpful a way of sort of senior management to be working either. And clearly they didn't have guidance and management leadership beforehand, but ultimately those decisions have now been made by them, and I'll make your recommendations at a higher level, but I'm not getting into making decisions in week 5 that are
So what did you do then in that situation? Like, how did you tackle that? Coming to you with a list of here's what we want you to decide on. What process do you walk through to sort of reverse that and empower them?
Yeah, just largely, well, what do you think we should do? And ultimately that's probably been kicked out of them over time. And so you just got to build up that confidence, and whether or not those people 6 months from now are the right people, that's a different decision. Right now, they know the business and I don't. What do you think we should do? Why haven't we done it already? What are we going to do about that? You know, yeah, it's not a complex one, really. It's just, yeah, I'm now, to Liz's point, we've got some big decisions that need to be made, and I'm focusing on those, and you guys need to get on and run the business day to day while I figure out what's going on.
Brilliant. Thérèse, the odd
I would
executive
like to
decision
really
making.
agree with this point on this. The hardest part is the trust. Because when you come from an environment where you know who to trust or not to trust, there you go to people and you go somewhere and you don't know who to trust. So I think for me, the skills to deploy are exactly the same as around, you do have to make, the decisions have to be made, but they have to be made by the people who are closest to the actual issue. And so your role is around fossicking around what are the alternative views. So gathering the alternate views, and I suppose you're at this stage in your career, you're used to making decisions. So using that information, not gut instinct, the information and the differing viewpoints to support a decision that somebody else has made and recommended to you. And exactly your point, 6 months' time might have been the wrong one, but you've got to do something at the time.
Absolutely. Mark, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, in addition, for me, that what's really driven me, whether I'm new to a place or I know it relatively well, is ultimately is the client. So, you know, no one's coming into me, you know, let me take you through this Excel spreadsheet and a lot of detail here and everything else like that. I want none of that. I don't want a PowerPoint, I don't want anything. You just talk me through it at a high level and you tell me why this is great for our clients. I think that's kind of quite a North Star that I've followed pretty heavily, because I think if you do great things, ultimately for your client, you're going to be in a great spot. Kind of long run, it sounds a bit trite, but it's, you know, I've never worked for a company that doesn't want to put clients first. You know, been on the boards, you know, I've never worked for anyone that said let's put them last. But they don't put the effort in to go and so what does that actually mean day to day we're really going to do and how we're really going to think. That's what sets people apart. So that thinking and the decision making, I want to see the client in there at that center. What's that impact? Why is that great then or not? Is something. If I can't see that coming out, you know, we're not doing it. The other piece is I think I heard Jeff Bezos say this, and I thought very good, is that a lot of decisions are actually reversible. So you can spend a tremendous amount of time on something that, quite frankly, if it wasn't quite right, you could change it. So actually spend all your time on a few that you really can't change. They're a nightmare to change. And that's where you put your effort. Whereas I think you spend so much time on things, quite frankly, if that's not quite right, I'll stop it. And that's where you can put, you know, energy into those really big ones that are going to cause you almighty problems if they don't. Whereas I think we tend to get involved in everything under the sun.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like leadership is at a bit of an inflection point, or certainly tougher now perhaps than it's ever been. There's a huge amount of information coming at you. There's changes in ways of working. We've got all sort of levels of uncertainty, plus we've got challenging economic conditions. Talk us through the differences when you think of the role as it exists right now in comparison with when you stepped into your first exec leadership role. How are things different? What do you have coming at you now? What's the kind of the status quo for you right now? Thérèse, maybe pick up on
I think it's a good question, Dave, because one of the things that's worrying me so much about my role right now is the impact of AI and digitization. It's going so fast, and I just don't understand most of it, to be perfectly frank with you. I understand it at a high level, but like I don't actually understand it fully. And leading an organization through needing to embrace AI, and when we don't even know how to measure the benefits that are going to come from AI, we know we have to do it. And you've got the responsibility to deliver back to your shareholder for a return that they want on the investment they've made on this. So for me, when I reflect on it, I spent a lot of time thinking about this. It's still about good leadership, and it's about putting in place the right leaders who have the right level of energy underneath you around AI, but at the same time having guardrails there. So if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have been gung-ho because I'm an action-oriented person. I think now when I look at it, I'm more inclined to be the person who say, let's go fast, but let's reflect. And let's really not be sheep on this. And because that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a whole ton of sheep-like behavior without some real reflection on what this might do to our workforce and to our society. while at the same time knowing you cannot run a business and not try to deliver the efficiency, the revenue, the productivity benefits that come from AI. So for me, I think it's the leadership skill set around continuing to learn. You have to continue to learn. You have to listen to others more than ever. You have to listen to others, but you also have to be confident that core leadership skills are still critically important around how you're going to navigate the journey ahead.
Interesting.
It's that innate curiosity at all times, and you know, everything that just to
Yeah.
really deep scratch the surface more than what's
Yeah.
been showing up, so you can understand it. Because it's different
Yeah.
to when we came through our exec to our exec roles.
Yeah, I'm not actually particularly worried about the change of leadership, skill set going forward. I mean, I don't think Mandela become a bad leader tomorrow because his AI agent told him to do something stupid. It's leadership fundamentals. I don't believe actually change. And for me, it's about consistency, communication, and delivery. And I will never be an AI expert, but I know that I'll need to bring people in who are, and I'll need to learn and grow. But as a leader, having a growth mindset. The key fundamentals of being a good leader won't change. The types of people we'll need to employ and the tools that they'll use will be hugely different than they were 5, 10, 15 years ago, but they were that prior the same again. Like everything's changed since we started out on the journey, and it'll change again before we're finished. So change is a constant, and just having the growth mindset to be able to adjust to it, to deliver for the stakeholders. But fundamentally, the basics don't change. But that's just my view. That's probably overly simple.
I would certainly agree with Blair as well. I think you could actually even argue that, I guess looking into the future and AI, etc., that leadership is the one thing that's going to change the least. I mean, there's lots of other people's jobs that will literally change, dramatically will disappear. But I think some of those really core leadership capabilities, if I think of leaders that I've worked for in the 80s and the 90s, good ones, really good ones, I think they would be equally really good today because they've just got those really core skills that make a difference. Sure, I think it's very hard to be a leader today if you haven't got good kind of digital AI kind of awareness of what it can bring, and that curiosity and that challenge around your team. You might go back in the 80s, have a fantastic CEO that couldn't even turn the computer off. You're going to be in major trouble. But I think those kind of key skills, that growth mindset, and that kind of what possibilities. And again, without harping on, is that the client, when you're talking about AI and where we're going, what are we going to do, and robotics, and this is it, what's the impact on the client? Is that what they want? Or not? And be sure kind of, where you're going. So again, harping back to someone like Milford, asset management, it's quite interesting. You're seeing clients that are it's quite a bifurcation of clients now. There's some that go, if I have to speak to someone, and my son would be one of these, if I have to speak to someone at Milford, then you're rubbish and I'm moving. It's just terrible. I'm not speaking well. And then you'll have other people that go, thank God I can speak to someone. And it's interesting, but at Milford now, we're actually, they are actually creating more regional offices than ever. What's that telling you around people still wanting to connect, catch up in the region? So it's not a kind of a given the way it's all going. It's quite interesting. So I think you've just got to be clear where you're going. And you're seeing companies like CBA the other week, they fired a whole load of people because they put AI in and they had to rebuild because the jobs actually didn't go, but it helped them. So it's a kind of fascinating space. But I think it's going back to the purpose of the organisation is so critical, and where you're going to help guide you. But I think most of people said is I think it's some of this agile. Get on with it. Can't be too risky. Let's try it. Try it in small ways. See what you find. See what the reaction is. What are your clients saying? Haven't gone too far. It is a disaster. Let's pull it back and do that. Or let's move on. But I think not being too afraid of kind of change, because I think it. I was just saying before we started, when I first really shown my age, when I first started out as an accountant, planning role, I did all the financial. You had to do all the financials in pencil. And probably some of you don't know what a pencil is, but actually in pencil. And if they wanted a kind of a scenario, they could have two. Because it took all day, and you literally rubbed all the stuff out and put it all back in it. Yeah. I mean, it's been phenomenal change that we've all been through, and that will continue. That's just part of.
Is it possible to look forward then and think how that impacts leadership competencies? talked about the fact that the core sort of foundational skills are enduring. But when you look ahead, do you see anything that emerging leaders will need to add to their game or bring to the table?
It's probably more than anything. I think it's around that decision making is being prepared to be agile and being prepared to try things. I think is this the only kind of way forward. You know, we've probably all worked on projects, the old traditional waterfall project. You know, it's been 5 years trying to work out what this project will mean. 2 weeks into it, it was completely different. I think there's so much change happening so fast that you've just got to be agile, and as a leader, you've got to be kind of encouraging that and watching it, because it's very different. It feels to some extent like you might be losing a bit of control.
But what does that agility look like in practice?
I think it's having it's empowering your teams, but actually having the right kind of check-ins at the right time. You're looking for those kind of check-in points. I guess you've got to be sure what success looks like, and that's probably the other thing I would say is if I throughout all my career and I go around and talk to staff all the time, which I'd like to, it's quite interesting, and I'd say to them, "You're in a role. What does success look like?" They're actually not sure. It's quite interesting, not so when you're kicking off things, be really quite. So you might want to be quite iterative on it, but just that first phase, what would success look like? Next one. So you've got the right kind of checking points, and you can kind of let things go, and you're not overlooking, you're not interfering, and then you can check in at the right point again and again. And so I think, yeah, that kind of leadership is that, and purpose. I just think now as a leader of, you know, staff want, and even clients to some extent, want to gather around a purpose. You know, you just see so many organizations, not actually, you know, busy and doing this, and you say, why am I doing this? So I think a leader that can keep connecting things back to the purpose, I think will really help Steve.
Absolutely. Liz, you have to think forward as far as it's possible. What are your thoughts on what emerging competencies might be coming down the line for executive leaders?
I think that line of sight to understand, you know, being agile, but the line of sight to understanding risks. So being, you know, scenario considerations of what risk might exist and what mitigations you can put in place. Because if you're going to have to keep moving through, at least considering that risk profile as you go into something and then keep iterating it can just keep you a little bit more alert to things as they change. Probably the big one for me.
Grace, what are your thoughts?
I think for me, there's a couple of different levels to it. I think a lot of the AI opportunities that are in front of us are coming. You need mid-level leaders who actually know what the processes are. We don't know them. So the real low-hanging fruit sits in that middle-level leadership. So it's, have you got the right people in there who are thinking the right way around what we need to do to change? That's hard because people who've been in those roles have been really good at operational leadership. Quite different to somebody who's able to help you implement AI and create the new workforce. So there's that. Sorry,
I was just going to ask, what is thinking the right way then at that level?
I think it's around looking at the way I think about it is there's a intermediate term and then there's longer term. So if you've got a team of, I mean, really simplistic here, if you've got a team of 50 people, and we know that 50 people is probably going to be 10 people at the end of next year, what are you doing now to make sure the people you're taking on are the right people for that remaining 10 people?
Yeah.
Or as people are leaving, you're not replacing them with the exact same person. Sounds simplistic. That is really hard in practice to get your mid-level managers to do that.
So those roles become more forward-thinking, they become more strategic.
Just like really good people leaders, but in a different sort of a way around saying, how am I creating the opportunities for my really good people? And how am I managing my people who likely won't have an opportunity in the future? And how do I give them dignity and create an environment for them where they can go somewhere else, or maybe go somewhere else in the organization that actually is going to be suitable for their skills? And then the second level for me, kind of at a senior level, it's around picking up on the point that was earlier made by Liz around, I think, the more extreme, managing those more extreme elements of it, where you want people who want to go really fast on AI and digitization and a super strong AI focus, with also people who have a really strong voice around protection, data, consumer, etc., at a more extreme level. I think now we're facing into this, and being able to manage that balance between both of them as a CEO is really important.
How do you think about doing that? What's is there?
I think it's the people, a lot of it's the people. I'm lucky at the moment because I've got 2 roles that are vacant on my team, so I'm able to think about what I want and how does that balance its way across to the team. But I think I don't know what the right outcome is. It's some of it's around, okay, in the next 6 months, what do we want to get done, and do these people look like they're the right people to actually get it done for me? And it's a bit of a leap of faith. But I think it's around, we're all in it together. It's a team. You're just basically trying to meld everybody together. So it's around making sure every part of the team is working together and everybody knows what their roles are.
Yep.
And you're just literally sitting in the middle helping to make
Facilitating
it
that
happen.
collaboration. Yeah.
It is really interesting hearing that there could be more and more pressure that the next leaders coming up through are what I call desk jockeys. So because of AI, because of the queries, because of the agents you can write, because you can do a lot of things more yourself. Quite interesting that you could then be at your desk a lot more than ever before. And I think that's going to be quite interesting for those individuals coming through to how you talk about how you break away from that a little bit more. Like I wouldn't want to run, say like Milford from my desk firing off emails. Horrible. But more and more kind of automation and more AI, for me the fear is that people will be more and more kind of at the desk and losing all those skills around get off your desk, walk around, talk, and I again, just going back to Milford, some of the leadership team, and last time I met the client was 1960, just not good enough, get out there. What are they saying? But I think there's going to be more pressure than ever to be at your desk doing things. It's going to be Excel times 1,000, and so I think it's going to be quite an interesting challenge for leadership and organizations to just make sure that doesn't happen too much, that it stops all the other skills that you will need developing.
Blair, any thoughts on
No, not much to add on that.
Fair enough.
It's all rubbish.
Comprehensive.
How can you pull that back?
Just changing gears a little bit. I mean, you've all been, as we've talked through, you've all been in roles that are highly visible, high level of scrutiny on them. Interesting in what you do to manage that from a sort of a personal standpoint. How do you remain resilient? How do you manage the pressure that you come under? Sort of strategies or mindsets do you have in place? Liz, do you want to kick that off?
I don't get it right every time. In fact, I don't get it right a lot of the time. I have got better in knowing the signs for me when I do need to reset. For me, getting outside, exercise is a really key thing, and on a frequent basis. I used to say to my, I've got 18-year-old twins, I used to say I'm a lot nicer mummy when I've been out for a run. And I was a lot nicer person when I've been outside. So, but there are phases and stages that mean I need to actually check in on myself and go, this isn't working, I need to reset so that I am back in that habit. Because I actually use it for my learning time as well. I'm often listening to podcasts or, audiobooks. And so it's not a complete break, but it is a thinking away from a screen break. And I think that's, for me, that's really valuable.
Did you structure that in because you know it's coming, or do you wait until you see the signs? And if so,
no, I try as best as I can to make it happen. It's more when at the moment, brand new into role is fitting that into, life can be really challenging.
Yeah.
So it's just keeping alert to when I'm dropping off, high expectations. I do it 6 times a week. So if I'm seeing that sort of filter down, I go, no, I need to reset for me. Because I'll be better off for my preparation into going into the work environment.
I guess building that in is probably easier said than done.
Absolutely.
When you go into a new role, you've got all this sort of new information coming at you. So how do you kind of honour that time? Would you just, you recognise that it's got to be set aside for a period of time, but you have to pick it up at some point?
Yeah, and look, I will be out you know, before the light in the morning, and I'll be pounding the streets at night in the rain just because I need to get out of the house. And it's my way of relaxing. Some people will sit in front of a television, some people will sit in front of another screen, but for me, I need to get outside. So I just force myself to do it.
What about you? How do you
Yeah, I think
like
in the work environment, I spend quite a bit of time thinking about how I manage that, and then the pressures of that, and one of my old colleagues used to say the Frankel sort of quote of between stimulus and response is a space, and that space is where we can choose how to react to things, and I just try and be really unemotional about things and be really pragmatic, and so within that workspace try and be as sort of consistent as possible, not to have too many highs and lows. And then as a leader, that's a really important thing, is that we sort of set a balance, and then outside of it, I try and do what Liz is clearly hasn't been working lately, but that it is about having, like for me, blocking time, and then one of the things that I need to make sure I do is make sure that my home life is in order strongly. So we'll make sure that we have a trip a year where it's just my wife and I, ditch the kids, really home back in on what's really important, and then try and do that on a sort of semi-regular basis at home as well. Both busy, both working, 6 and 8 year old kids. It's a lot. And I think the reality for me is there's no real such thing as work-life balance. It's sort of how it blends together and how you just get on with it and deal with it. They do morph into each other. That's just the reality of the role that you're in. But you do have to try and carve out time, whether it be 4:30 in the morning, for a run, or something else. You've just got to find what works for you. Sometimes for me that's a run. Sometimes it's a nice glass of wine. Balance can be
Both.
yeah,
I that's my balance.
but knowing yourself,
Yeah.
and what's important to you.
Actually, what about you, Thérèse?
I think it's for me, I've always had a good sense of perspective, to be honest. And it's around what actually is important, and when you're a working mother with 2 small children, there is nothing more stressful than that. Nothing. So everything, it pales into much lower significance when the children are a bit older and you think, oh, thank God, I don't have to worry about that anymore. But the kind of tips and tricks that because I'm able to turn on, I really like switching off. That's my superpower. I just switch off. So I have to, at times in your career where you're so busy, you have to find that time to switch off. So there were a few little tricks that I did. So when the kids were really little, and I used to share quite a lot of the A&P committees, I'd get up really early Saturday morning and spend 4 hours doing that work on Saturday morning, which means that by the time I got out of bed, I had the whole weekend free. And I was so delighted because it gave me that downtime. So I needed that switch off time.
Yeah.
Really good at exercise. Oh, I find the switch off time. But also I would say you can't, if somebody is busy all of the time, 100% of the time, there's something wrong with that. You shouldn't be. There are times you'll be super, super busy, but the rest of the time you've got to be resilient. You've got to be resilient for your team. You've got to be resilient for your family. And so you have to find that control. Take back your control. Don't let people steal your time. Take it back, but reflect on the fact that there will be times where it gets out of control, but that should be 10% of the time, not 90% of the time.
I think that pragmatism or practicality is really important. I don't know, in my in a role in the seafood sector, salespeople, a lot of pressure. Everyone thinks it's really busy and really important. It's like, guys, it'll still be dead tomorrow. The fish will still be dead tomorrow. It's really not that big of a deal. Go home, have dinner with your family. Like, seriously, it's not really that important. It is really important.
But that's sense of perspective.
Yeah, I think all great stuff. I adding to it, a biggie for me probably is humor, and trying to kind of just bring that into a lot of everyday conversations, be it with your leaders, etc. It's amazing how it opens up the conversation. There's something you think we can have a chuckle about, etc., etc. Just resets, in a small way. I tend to think it's small things that all add up to kind of make a difference. So that's something I've tried to bring as a leader, is prepared to just have a bit of a chuckle or a bit of a joke or something that's not quite worked. Like I said before, most things actually are reversible. And unless you're working in hospitals or things like this, probably no one's died. So you've got to keep that in perspective as well. The one thing somebody said to me a long time ago, which has always resonated, is decide what you're prepared to die for, and that can't be 10 things every day. And I just see so many people, actually up and coming leaders, one of the biggest things they struggle with is just this, let stuff get really senior people and they're worrying about what you're wearing. Yeah, and you're just going, you've just got to free yourself up for that, because otherwise you start worrying about all kinds of little bits and pieces. And so I think that's important. Again, exercise might not look like, but that's a biggie for me. Things like, I love golf, I hate it. But, when you're in the middle of some trees trying to work out how you hit this wonderful shot back out again, your mind's gone. So you need something that really rips you away from that kind of work. But again, probably knowing that when you've made, going back to this kind of engagement and doing decision making, is you've made informed decisions. You'll get, shit. I've worked in best companies, some of the best companies with the best people. My God, there's some astonishing things that kind of go wrong. It's going to happen, but I think you've got to have a kind of a mindset that can happen. Mistakes will happen. And as they're saying, as a leader, you don't want somebody in your team coming along and going, got a problem here, and you're going, hang on a second, let me find the petrol, and I'll start putting this on the flames, blowing it all up. You've got to have that level. It's just put some perspective on this. And equally, when things are brilliant, it's just kind of calm down. Another day tomorrow. So as a leader, you've got to try and stay in that space. But again, having a little bit of that kind of free time where you're thinking about things as well, and reflecting. Oh, that didn't quite work. Well, why was that? Because usually you're racing on to the next thing. So there's lots of little bits and pieces, I think. But I'd still, for me, it's just humour in a way. It's hard, but just having a bit, and just small bits of humour all the time. But you've got to be a bit careful nowadays, obviously, with quick comment, well meant, could get you in an awful lot of trouble. I'm not saying this happened to me.
Sorry, so if I could just come back to you on that time management point, because it sounds like you've made a real study and putting guardrails around your time and making sure you're not overcommitting. So what are some of the sort of the key tips, tricks that you've used to manage that?
Well, you have to have good people around you at the start, so you can't do it all yourself. So you have to be prepared to delegate and create a good team around you. That takes time, probably a couple of years before you've got a really good, well-functioning team.
And building that trust, as we talked about.
Yeah, and I think there is just there are some things that are sacrosanct for me, and I'll just block them out. So I do Bikram yoga a couple of times a week, and I'll exercise most days, and so I'm just doing them. And if I have to do that early in the morning, I'll do that early in the morning because I've got a 7 o'clock meeting. But if I've got 3 early morning meetings, I'll try and have 2 not early morning meetings. We're out for dinner because in the current role that I have, we have a lot of entertaining that we have to do. Then effectively, I'm not going to come in for a 6 o'clock meeting the next morning. I'll come in for 9 o'clock or 9:30.
Right.
So it's just having the confidence to take control, because everybody wants you to be resilient. Everybody wants you to have that control. So stop worrying that others are concerned that you're not sitting there at 7 o'clock. Nobody actually cares, to be perfectly frank with you. You just got to make sure it works for you.
Awesome. Just before we throw it open to Q&A, just wanted to get your sort of final, if you could share one piece of advice that you think up and coming exec leaders should know, what's the kind of key takeaway? Liz, if I could start with you.
Never stop learning. Never stop being curious.
Wise words.
Glad to follow. Back yourselves. You're all here, so you all must have some level of confidence. It's a good start. But be humble, but be your own biggest backer, because no one else is going to do it for you. And I think equally as importantly, like especially, certainly in my journey, is have someone else who believes in you just as much as you do. If you haven't got that at home, go find it.
Yeah, awesome. I would agree with that. I think for me, and particularly in corporate life, this is the most important thing for you to look for is a leader who's going to grow you. And if you don't report to a leader who's going to grow you, find a leader who can grow you, either sideways or in a different organisation.
Just on that then, is it possible to know that sort of ex ante, as in before you take the job, or are you just always a little bit rolling the dice on it?
Well, there's lots of gossip, so everybody knows everybody in New Zealand, so you kind of, and you do. I mean, if you ask somebody about a leader and they're a good leader, more often than not, they will have been heard of.
Reputation,
Yeah.
Good and bad.
I'd certainly echo that. If what I would encourage you to do, if there are kind of opportunities you're looking at, is just focus 100% on the company and the people at that company. The temptation is it's going to be salary, it's going to be title, it's a nice car park, it's quite close to work, and we all kind of start drifting that way. But every time I've made a decision that's really been based on that organisation, backing that organisation, because the best way to grow really is you move into a place that is growing. and then you're getting internal opportunities to kind of grow with it. So it's sometimes it's, you know, money matters, especially when you're younger. You know, well, it's a great job that's paying a lot of money, but just really focus on that organisation you're joining. Is that the right place? Is that the right place you can grow with? The other thing I'd say as well is you can learn so much from failing, and you know, don't go out and try and fail, but you know, I'd say fail young. So that's again where you can try some things as there's not as much at stake. You know, you go and fail as a CEO of Milford on something. See, that could be you know, career ending. So you've got a chance when you're that little bit younger to try a few things, and you might fail and you can learn. But higher up, stakes get higher. Kind of get a bit more kind of risk averse, and therefore maybe you don't get those opportunities. You learn so much from things that haven't gone well compared to these things that on the face of it have gone well. So can you know, don't be afraid to do a bit of that.
Brilliant. Okay. Now your chance to ask any questions. Pick brains about panel.
So, Matt's just spoken about failure, and everyone on the panel has spoken about kind of don't be afraid to make the wrong decisions. I'm really curious and admitted to making some wrong decisions. I'm really curious to know how everybody responded when they either realised they'd made the wrong decision, or someone came up to them and said, "Hey, this is the wrong decision." Just how did you manage that? What were your actions?
Mine was probably more in the choices I made early from a where do I go next, and the learnings I got for what are my criteria for thinking about how I make the next shift. So I shifted from working at Lion to a really small pharmaceutical company, and I was in my early 20s. And I realised quite quickly I hadn't done my due diligence in terms of understanding who I was reporting to, in terms of the manager and the leader I was reporting to, who's a very brown suit accountant, dry, and wasn't willing to lead a 20-something aspirational, you know, curious person. And I didn't understand the company either in terms of their scale and complexity was way too small. But I stuck it out, got as much learning out of that to then go when my next change I made, I was more deliberate. I still got it wrong. I chose a bigger organization, but I still didn't do my due diligence in terms of testing that who was I going to be working for. But once in there, I used that opportunity to get around and do different roles within the organization because it was big and it had the scale and it had the opportunities.
Anybody else got any thoughts on that?
So it's a question around the mistakes sort of we've made and how we dealt with them, or how other people have come to us with mistakes that they've made. I wasn't quite either or. Yeah, well, I made a very similar mistake and went to an organisation I hadn't done enough diligence on, and it was a very poor experience. But I didn't stick it out. I got lucky, and the right thing came up very, very quickly. But that was a lot of luck. I think that the learning I've moved around a lot and done a lot of different industries, but there's also, I see other people who have got roles that I might have aspired to who have done that by staying in the same organisation for quite a period of time. So don't be afraid of that either. I think as long as you're advancing and learning like that, that's really healthy. If you don't feel like anyone's got your back, you haven't got a leader who's growing you, like it's time to go somewhere else. But then when people come to me with, oh shit, I did this and this was the outcome. Well, great, good. I didn't know we'd done that, but good. That's a good decision. Like, the right decision made with the information at the time. What's the next step? What's the next course of action? What do we do now? That's the only important thing at that point. Start learning. My very recent boss of mine had a favourite saying was, in the light of new information, I'm prepared to make a new decision. Mm-hmm. And, we made a decision at the time that was the best one we thought there was. And guess what? It was a bad one. But there's new information. I now know more. I'm prepared to change that decision and do something else. It's an easy way to kind of bluff over mistakes. But at the same time, it's pretty true. Like I've made a decision based on what I knew. Shit, it was a pretty bad one, but I now know this. Let's do something else.
Any questions?
Sure. We talked a bit about the work-life balance, which doesn't exist, and priorities. Probably curious a bit more about it. Just from all the solutions that you guys talked about, it seemed like, okay, I'm waking up at 4 a.m. to do that, or I'm late in the meeting at night. Does it mean that exec level just means you don't have time at all for even sleep.
No.
How do you manage that?
Yeah.
You know, solution of waking up at 4 a.m. to go for a run because I need it. It's also maybe not a very good one because eventually you run out of fuel.
I should correct myself too, because you made a great point. I play golf every weekend, and I don't give that up for anything. And I've just got back from the UK, worked, it's 5 days on the ground in the UK, 9 days in total, and I'm not going to turn up on when I got home on Sunday. I'm not going to be there at 7 a.m. on Monday because I want to take the kids to school and do a couple of things. So when I say there's no such thing as balance, it just doesn't happen between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. I work various time zones. I'll work Sunday, but if I need to, if I want to, then I'll find that space somewhere else. But it's just a blend rather than a balance. But yes, there are periods of time where you will have to get up early on a regular basis, but then others, it'll swing back the other way. So it's not all bad.
It's not 24/7 like
I
that.
think that's the message we were
No.
getting. To be honest, I thought the message was more do within your time frame what works for you. That's the message. And so if you don't want to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, go for it. Fine.
Yeah.
I want to be in bed at 10 o'clock at night. That's me. So it's just around taking control of the situation yourself. But the reality is there is more workload. You're getting paid more. You have to work more.
Yeah.
There's no magic bullet on that.
Lucy, any thoughts on that?
No, I think, and then I remember hearing somebody talk. I chose to go back to work when the girls were 6 months old, and I've chosen to be full time since then. But that was a choice. But somebody also said, then choose people around you to support you. So if you can afford it, choose a cleaner because it's the time you can spend doing something else with your family instead of cleaning the house on a Saturday morning. Get childcare that supports you to be able to do both of those things. So it's just making those choices in terms that prioritization in terms of what's important in different phases. And I can tell you what, back when the girls were, most of their way through school, I wasn't prioritizing my wellness. I wasn't looking after my getting outside. But as they've got older, I've got different freedoms that have come from them being older and being able to find that time. So it ebbs and flows based on age and stage of your life.
And I think I agree with all that, and to me, if I look at my last role or any role where I've had a big team of people, it's I don't care where they are, how they organise, what they're doing to get things done. I'm totally on it's outcomes, it's that we're trying to achieve. They decide how best it works and fits in for them with their life. It might need a conversation so people kind of understand it. That's often what I find is missing sometimes with people. You're not having an honest discussion with your boss around this is how I like things that work really well for me, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think now that if you look at leaders, it's so much more on, okay, it's what you say, certainly how you say it, but it's what you do. And there's if you're looking at leadership for me that's changed over the last few years, it's that leaders should be more self-aware, more aware of that kind of cloud, more aware of their kind of behaviors and what they're doing and how that can impact on others. So again, if you're there at night and and it works for you to fire a few emails off, well, just make sure you're chatting to your team to say that works for me because I've done some other things. I've picked a kid, I've done something with my grandkid, whatever. That works for me. I'm not expecting you to answer that email, but you've sometimes got to have that upfront conversations around your styles and the way you're kind of working to try and get things done. But I kind of just look for that. I don't look for time in the office or time, I look for kind of that bit of energy and that passion. And I think everyone therefore has got to go at the right pace, that you've got energy. And when you're in a meeting, there's nothing worse if you're a more junior member of staff and the boss turns up and they're not present. It's an absolute shot. I've learned that one way back. You've got to be present. So you've got to, everyone's got to look after yourself. And Thérèse's point is you're in actually, and I've learned this one even quite later on, you're in more control than you think. You really, really are, and have those kind of conversations around what works and be in charge.
Got time for one more question. Anybody think you want to ask?
Just curious, we've talked a lot about decisions and time effectiveness and working well as a team. Are there
Are there any things that you would use AI to help you with any of those dimensions in terms of making better decisions or being? Is there anything you're particularly using?
Very good question. I can
Right.
absolutely guarantee you, I'm going to be using AI to write my board papers. Definitely, and I'm not joking, because it is just so time consuming. So all this data suddenly is in the one spot, happy days, and it's probably right. So yes. Yes.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that's fine for me, because then my job is to go through it and make sure it's right, but the sheer operation of
Yeah.
pulling together board packs is
Yeah.
just massive.
Yeah.
And most of that is just dragging stuff from all other parts of the business, so yes, it will be.
Yes, as I understand it more. I've got to understand it because there's still going to be that human intervention, but I think that some of that administration stuff will, over time, just be made a lot easier.
Yeah, even at a basic level, I'm using it now to do market analysis, population mass by, multiplied by climatic conditions. Does this market work for me or not? I could have spent a lot of money figuring that out, and I'll take it as a guide if it passes the sniff test. It's just about economies of effort and time. If there's things that it can help me inform me on faster, happy days.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big yes, but I think you just got to be careful how you kind of use it. So I'd use some of you might be familiar, Diligent, Bull Books, and they're bringing in AI now to give you a little summary of the paper. I mean, quite frankly, used it last time, waste of time, didn't really kind of add much, and then it's gonna start moving to questions you want to ask. Just be careful, I guess, how you use it, because I think there's a lot of talk and papers at the moment on where you stop thinking. You literally read a paper and I think at all, let me ask. And I think everyone's going to be really kind of careful that I think if it augments what you do, I'd like to know a bit more about something to help me think about this. I think great, but I think everyone's got to be a little bit careful would be my take, that it's stops that kind of thinking. And if you're a board member, you should be there coming from different angles, different perspectives, and not being too, I mean, nothing worse than if you all sit here and you've all got the same ChatGPT question.
Yeah. But it also carries bias. Yeah. It carries biases as well. It's a learning process, and so making sure that you've got the human oversight is still there.
One final question that came in via Zoom, maybe more for Thérèse and Mark, having held CE roles, but if you're promoting people to executive leadership roles from within your company, what are you looking for from people that are perhaps in non-strategic roles, that are operational leaders that need to demonstrate strategic capability? How is it possible for them to evidence that? What sort of thing might you be looking for?
I think for me, it's people showing a willingness to step outside their core role at a more junior role, and doing different things, a bit like what you were saying there around just people who are not so rigid in their core role that you can't see them doing something broader. So when you see people doing that, even though they may not necessarily be applying for the job might not even exist. You're seeing them through a different lens, so the flexibility they have to think and to work in a different role than the role that they're in, and their willingness to do it.
Yeah, so seeking out opportunities outside the comfort zone, is it? Awesome.
Yeah, would 100% agree that curiosity, that they're starting to take a really big business interest. So you often you're in your role of chief operating officer, I've got to do all this. Are they showing wider interests, products, clients? What are we doing as part? Can you see that in them? Because again, you've all been here, you get a high performer, and that can be quite different from a high performer who's got that high potential. So you're looking at people that are showing a business interest, showing a passion, showing an interest in other teams. They're actually catching up with colleagues across different departments. That's a massive one for me. They've got that one. And the one thing the thing I like about anyone that reports to me, and I look at it in others, is leave it with me. You hardly anybody ever says that to you, but when they do, as a direct report, you think,
Is that ownership?
leave it with me. And it's funny, I hardly ever hear it, but when you start to see that with people that are there going, I'll sort that out.
And we talked
You
want so much about trust and building trust. That's essentially what you're saying.
As long as they do it.
Might not be there, just define, leave it with me. So how long are you gonna take?
Awesome place to end. So much there. I really, really appreciate your time, particularly as I mentioned, three of you at least in new roles, and appreciate the effort and preparation time that goes into something like this. So thank you, and thank you all as well for making the time of coming along.